20 years ago in Southern Baptist Life, community formed with such strength that it emerged as its own entity. As the Spirit of God hovered over that chaos, the fellowship movement was birthed. It was entrusted to human beings for its caretaking, and they were good stewards, and some of you are in this room. They loved and nurtured it and formed it or organized it out of their own experience and their own training. What they knew is what they did in creating. As we dream and hope and aspire, the Spirit of God hovers over us now for our dreams to be birthed into the ever-dynamic process that is creation. What will change in the fellowship movement? What would new wineskins look like? In Peck's The Different Drum, chaos is the second level of community building because the chaos is the recognition of the rich diversity that creates the tension of holding to each other in community. This stage, this chaos stage, is a time of fighting and struggle. Well-motivated men and women clobber each other over the head with their own pet projects or ministries. Each wants his or her particular project or ministry to win or prevail, and each attempts to convert the others to his or her way. This stage of community chaos is community at a deeper level. It requires a new activity of the individuals in the community. It requires an emptying in order to create room for new. The room that comes from the emptiness is created by setting aside and discarding our presuppositions, for we find in this new community they're no longer applicable and will undermine all our best efforts at deeper community. The challenge, it seems to me, to move from dreaming to doing involves many things. At least two I would speak to. One, to develop a community, the fellowship movement, where we are not competitors, but truly live in shared community. And two, to clarify, confess, and claim our Baptist identity as Fellowship Baptist. By the very way we are structured, or some would say our lack of structure, we're forced to be competitors for resources. The organizational model we imposed on ourselves came from our previous experience. None of us had been part of something like the fellowship movement. We had no idea how to structure this thing, except out of our past experience. Our model was a highly structured entity that had developed decades of agreements, rules, customs, systems, processes that not only inhibited, but in most cases prohibited competition. What we find 20 years later is an inadequately constructed house, I believe. It's like we brought the facade materials from the former lumber yard, but the infrastructure materials are for a very different house. Our structure, therefore, is not built to last. In order for our dreams to become reality, we must bring clarity, make confession, and lay claim to what we agree identifies us as Fellowship Baptists. It surely must mean that we form authentic community in the fellowship movement. At the very least, it surely must mean stated shared values and vision for the fellowship movement that are not merely words on paper, but tenets of the community not to be violated. They bind us so tightly from our voluntary and committed participation that we can trust one another. It also must surely mean shared stewardship of the same community. We must be clear about what is expected from members of the community, the fellowship movement. I think we must agree on what it means to be a member of the community. We need to clarify to the extent that part of our identity is found in being a member of the community. We accept responsibility to steward the community, and when someone violates the community, we call out that behavior, for the sake of the community, not at the risk of the community. I think it must also mean sharing resources without being in competition with each other. This is not to say that I have a small vision of resources. I do not. However, I do believe that because competing for resources is required for the win, we've not been incentivized to relate in ways that are not competitive. We must do that. I think we must stop competing for resources. We must find ways to authentically work collaboratively, Larry, with some gain and some sacrifice on the part of each one of us. We cannot possibly do this until we trust each other. Trust is foundational for the future of the fellowship movement. It's foundational to our forming authentic community, and it's foundational for us to stop competing for resources. We have been a badly wounded people in the past, but that is the past. We have no reason to inflict wounds on each other. Instead, let us bind each other's wounds and receive in our healing a new trust of one another. We also cannot possibly do this unless integrity is a core component of our community. Integrity in both a sense of adhering to shared values that shape our behavior toward each other, and in believing that we need each other to have a complete community, a whole community. Integrity in individuals and in the community. We cannot possibly do this without voluntary participation and the assurance of autonomy. We will have to agree on what that autonomy means, what it looks like, how one is voluntarily autonomous, how one is a voluntarily autonomous member of the community. But I believe we can do it. I believe we must do it in order to make our visionary, creative dreams for the fellowship movement robust actions that have meaning in the work of God. In all those 10,000 places that Christ plays out, I'm willing to do it. I believe we can do it. I believe we must do it.